Devi Brown, welcome to Crying Out Loud. I'm Dr. Laura Berman, and this is your grief companion. Join me to learn how to soften the pain, steady the nervous system, and connect to your loved ones on the other side. None of us were meant to grieve alone, so let's cry out loud together.
So I'm crying out loud, I'm not holding it in, I'm shrinking my heart.
Devi Brown, thank you so much for joining us on The Language of Love. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Oh my God, such an honor and such a fan of the show. I was so excited to do this.
Oh, me too. I've been following you for a long time, and I love all of your wisdom and all of your content. And when I heard you had a new book out, I was like, we got to talk to her about the book. So, as I said, the new book is Living in Wisdom. And I loved it. I mean, I already loved your content and your voice, but after reading it, I really fell in love with your mind and your heart. It was just really beautiful. So
Thank you so much.
I'm excited to get into it with you. We're going to get into all sorts of things. There's so much we could unpack here, but when I was thinking about my peeps here and just even selfishly, the things that really stood out to me, we're going to be getting into, because the impetus, it feels like, or at least part of the stimulation for the teachings and even the system you developed that you share in this book grew out of your own grief. So I want to get into that. We're going to get into faith. We're going to get into trauma. We're going to get into surrender. We'll see where the conversation goes because we never know here.
No big deal. No big deal.
But the beginning of your story that you share, that kind of it was whopper of what I call an AFGE, another, I curse here just so you know, another fucking growth experience is what I call them. These things that kind of break you open and break you apart. And I'm wondering if you can, I know that like leading up to this all kind of came to a culmination in the middle of the pandemic, but you were no stranger to trauma, to grief, to upheaval. You had lost many friends. You had already been no stranger to grief. But I was wondering if we could just start there with what happened and what kind of catapulted you into the great AFGE, or the breaking apart that led to the breakthroughs.
I think one of the interesting things is when we think of trauma, a lot of us tend to think of like one specific thing. Or, when I was first kind of getting training in meditation many years ago, it was like the last sentence of the book that said you may encounter someone that's been to war and has trauma, and meditation may be hard for them. But so many of us have so many compounded experiences of trauma, so many things that are really complex to our lives, like layers and layers. And I think another percentage of people, it goes even deeper than that. There might be certain themes and patterns of pain or trauma that seem to follow you or replicate themselves in different areas. So I think that is something that very much was my path. I had a lot of really substantial, challenging, and confusing things happen to me starting from a very young age. And it felt like every year I was hit with like a new thing that may be another person's like one thing that happens. And so throughout my life, that had always been something I was kind of studying in myself without really having the words for, trying to understand. And I think when I started kind of my first round of healing is what I like to call it, which started for me around 2010. I started meditating. I started approaching my childhood. I started looking at things, but there's still so many blind spots, right? Because this is our life's work. And so when the pandemic happened, we were actually within, I want to say, the first several weeks of the pandemic, I got hit with an onslaught of things. One of my dear friends chose to end her life. And I decided to get divorced after being in a relationship for nearly a decade. And I remember it was all kind of happening, the beginnings of it, the same week that George Floyd was happening. And it was
Mhm.
just an impossible kind of feeling. And I'm teaching meditation every day. And I'm, showing up for this huge teacher community within the wellness company that I was working for. And so it was such a high level of grief,
Mhm.
of multi-layered grief, like the loss of a person. And then the pandemic brought forward, for all of us, kind of a deeper view at even the things we thought we had resolved. So I was kind of grieving a lot of loss. Then I was grieving really just the utter like annihilation of my marriage, of being in connection and community with someone I loved and I thought I was in like deep friendship and partnership with. And at that time I was a mom of an under 2-year-old.
Mm.
So it was like, I think
Big old AFG system hitting you. Storm, major tsunami.
major
Yeah.
tsunami. And those are the moments that you just have to look around and say, okay, God, yeah, there's nothing I can control here. There's nothing I can do.
Mhm.
Who are you calling me to be? Right? Like, who am I supposed to become? And I think I had gotten really good at that surrender, but this throughout my life, but this was kind of that deeper layer. And it was just like, all right, God, I'm not even going to try to pick the pieces of this up. I'm going to let all of it shatter on the ground and, let's see what happens.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I made a note of that you said there were so many beautiful things you say in the book, but there was this one place which is relevant to what you're saying. I would not let my heart wither and die. I would slowly bring it back to life. I would let it stretch open, and in the right divine time, God would show up and show me what I was.
Mm,
And I think that's so beautiful because obviously when you've been through and we're going to drill down more into this trauma idea, right? But even what you were referring to just now, this idea of compounded throughout your whole life, all these different things that for many people, and I've had my own version of multiple traumas that, which most people just experience one of these or maybe two of these,
right.
in their life. However, I would say that I think the majority of us maybe don't have huge like horrible, like major things that most people would consider the big T trauma in our life happen multiple times. But we have lots of little ones
Yeah.
or small T. I don't want to say they're little because they impact us in big ways. So we're going to get into that. But this idea of surrender,
Mm,
I think it's so important, and it's something that I talk about, and it was so helpful for me to read how you speak to it because it's something that I really have only been learning to do since my son died fully. I mean, I would play with
mm,
it and try it, and as you said, think I did it, but but it was on a whole new level, and it's about, you talk about this idea because it's hard for me to explain to people, like, you have to if you're gonna get through it, yes, you have to feel it to heal it, but there's also like a not fighting it, there's a softening into it, and you speak to the softening and the power that can be found there, and that allowing the shattering to stop fighting the pain, how that is where the change starts to happen.
yeah. I think it's interesting, right? Because I think a lot of people, the first feeling they have when really, like really hard things happen, like the dark
Mhm.
stuff that you will be thinking about for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
When those things happen, it feels like you're trying to just kind of tape and hold all these pieces together so you can still somewhat recognize yourself and
Mhm.
recognize your life. And I understand that. And depending on what else is happening in your life, that is necessary and safe for some people to do for a time. But when big things happen to you, you are meant to change form.
Yeah.
Are meant to really allow yourself to completely dissolve, to completely shatter into something else. And I think, at that exact moment, that was the very first time I had gotten so good at putting the pieces back together and making it beautiful, right? Like
Mhm.
very, very like kintsugi style. Like I'm
Right.
putting the gold and then
Yeah.
the peace and feeling proud of myself for the way that, brokenness seems to just I can be, unbreakable. It can pass me by and I needed to do that in the times that that was happening because I did have to keep going and I didn't
Yeah.
have support and I did need to figure it out. But then I think for some of us, especially those on the wounded healer path, God really commands you to be on your knees for a time. There are
Mhm.
things that you have to learn. There is a brokenness you have to understand. There is a pain in yourself and in others you have to build the capacity to bear witness to. And I think when that feeling comes in, if we can allow ourselves to just fall completely apart and not try to fix it and not kind of try to control it and find what that deeper layer of trust with God is. Because if we are in trust of God, and this is my belief, so just
Yeah.
all respect to any beliefs of whoever is listening,
Mhm.
but I believe in God and I live for and with God. So when you're in a place of brokenness like that and in that deep, dry valley, um, we can fight against our faith and not know it. If you say, I have faith in God and I have trust in God, but you don't let go and you keep trying to keep moving forward, you keep trying to find the solutions, that's not what faith is. And that's not to go against the idea of, faith without works is dead. You know the difference.
Yeah.
Know when you're being called to also participate with what's happening and when you're being called to stand by and step aside and let God. And I think that was the moment I really allowed myself to be in. Um, and because of that, it allowed me to become something I couldn't really fathom. It gave me new access. It gave me deeper layers. It changed the way I was able to be in my body and able to be in community with other people forever.
Yeah.
You don't know that while you're in it. And I wasn't getting any reassurances while I was in it, right? That's the scary part. You can't
Mhm.
forecast it. You can't vision board it. You can't demand that someone tell you it will eventually be okay. That's where trust is built. That's where faith is built. But if you can let yourself do that, my God, there is just so much freedom and so much beauty to come.
Yeah, I have definitely, and that gives me chills hearing you say that. And it's interesting because, and I want to talk about, well, first of all, I want to talk about faith, which we're going to get to in a second, but just even this idea of the metamorphosis. I've been saying this for so long now because I've experienced it myself. And now that I'm helping so many other people and guiding so many other people through this process, that grief in all its forms is a profound portal of transformation. That breaking apart, that loss, whether it's a loss of a job, a loss of a partner, a loss of someone you love, um, is such a breaking apart and breaking open. And it's that classic metamorphosis of but you have to turn to mush. The caterpillar has to turn to mush before it can reconfigure as the butterfly. And I remember it was maybe even a week, or it was really soon after our son died. My husband, we were sitting on the sofa. My husband said, I know a lot of people, a lot of couples don't make it through something like this, but we're going to make it through. And I knew then, I said, I think you're right, but I also am so aware right now that there is not a cell in my being that is going to be the same on the others. On the other side of this, I have no idea who I'm going to be. I have no idea what it's going to look like. I hope you like her, you know, but like, I have no idea. And I was raised in a very secular way. There was no God. My parents were God. My abusive, narcissistic father was God, and he was not a very friendly God or a very dependable one. So I didn't until much later in my life, due to another series of AFGEs, kind of had an awakening, which I think is one of the cool parts of this. You came to yours with a kind of built-in faith, right? And we can talk about where that came from. I want to ask you in a second. But for me, and I think for many of us, when we go through something hard, especially a loss to death, I think what I've been seeing is that in a longing to somehow see if there is something on the other side, or if we can connect, or if there is something beyond this 3D world, we open the door just a crack and we peek through. And then what you see on the other side, you're like, holy yet, whoa, like, and then if you walk through the door, like, so it's so cool to me how grief can be not only a portal of transformation, but a portal of awakening, right? So I'd already done a version of that maybe 10 years before losing my son. And I felt a real connection and an awareness of a divine force, of a higher power, of universe, whatever you wanted to call it. But I couldn't wrap my head because obviously all the images I have of God or growing up or whatever was around, organized religion, which I don't subscribe to. So I didn't really have like any kind of personal relationship with God, so to speak. It was like this power that makes everything happen, and it's in everything, and it's beautiful, and it's quantum, and all of that. And that definitely helped. But what I've gone through over the past 4 years has opened the door to really longing for and building more of that two-way relationship with God. And I think that, and faith is always, right? Just choosing to believe in something you can't prove or that, right? But it's scary as hell to do. So I'm wondering if you can speak to, because I know I'm not the only one that struggles with faith and a concept of God. And for those of my peeps here who like maybe don't have a relationship with God and want to or are curious about it, like what would you say?
Oh my God. I mean, just like so much that you said there, I really want to honor your journey.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I really, really honor what you walked through and what you have built and created in spite of that.
Thank you. You're gonna make me cry. I'm like so matter of fact now when I speak about it, unless someone reacts to it, and then I get emotional. Thank you.
I think even like this, right? Like this is how I feel God. This is how I know God. Um, I wasn't raised with God. I wasn't raised in a household that there was an againstness to God, but there was just no talk of God. There was no time for church. I kind of heard of church. I kind of heard of the Bible. And I know that sounds very crazy, but I was
No, it doesn't.
still raised by a single parent. So, in a lot of ways, there was a lot of isolation for me. And so I didn't know about religion, but I was getting a lot of information, kind of emotionally and spiritually throughout my childhood. I didn't, I had never really heard stories about Jesus, but I started thinking about Jesus, if that makes sense. As like a little girl, I started feeling an energy of something being with me. And as like a very isolated child, an only child again, which is a very specific experience. A lot of people don't necessarily understand, but I think it's only 12% of the global population are only children. I think that
Mm.
fact still stands. So it's just a very different experience. You kind of have different ways of communicating or being in community. And so we were moving around a lot. So there was never steady home or community for me, but there was this steadiness that I felt that I didn't know what it was.
Mm.
And I think from a very young age, I kept investigating that steadiness. I didn't have any guidance on how to do that or any real ability to like, maybe ask the most poignant questions, but I was aware of it and I would just continue to kind of engage with it and be with it. And the way that I would feel that power the closest, from a very young age, I was really obsessed with the sun. And I still am. If you follow me on Instagram, it's like sun porn. It's just like all sunshine, sun rays, on my stories. But I used to close my eyes and let the sun hit my closed lids and just study the orange glow that would be in my eyes, and I would feel safe. I would feel like there was someone there that protected me. Um, and that was really the beginning of the foundation. And I remember at a young age, again, without really knowing much about any biblical stories, like just the understanding really arrived in my heart of do unto others as you would have done unto you. And I think for a long time, what was confusing about having that feeling and knowing on my heart, but being in a world that seemed so narcissistic, like everyone around me and all the adults that I kind of saw out in the world were saying one thing and their behavior wasn't meeting that. So I was seeing a lot of people say, this is who they are, or they love God, but then their choices and their behavior didn't really support any of that.
Yeah.
So internally, I felt confused and I felt lost because I'm like, well, if we're supposed to do this, how come no one is treating me the way I want to be treated?
Yeah. Amen.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's when some of my real dialogue with God began and some of my anger with God. And I think that's how I began my relationship with God, because to build a relationship with God as above, so below, it's like every other relationship. It is complicated and sometimes it's hard. And sometimes you are angry and confused. You know, we are having this deeply powerful experience with an energy we can't even fathom or see,
Yeah.
right? Like none of this is like scientifically provable, yet it is. So it's like in that dynamic, I want everyone to know who is maybe in relationship with God, seeking it or struggling within the confines of it. Our relationships with God are like our relationships with ourselves and everything else. There are peaks, there are valleys. There is sometimes a lack of faith. There is sometimes this just like magnificent amount of faith that cloaks you, this miraculous energy that encircles you and fills you with just an indescribable gratitude for all of it. You know, the grief and the joy for all of it.
Yeah.
But it's all cyclical. It's a cycle and it's dependent on how you're co-creating with God, how you're making choices, what is currently happening in your experience. But our relationship with God is something I believe we should be pursuing always and just really having our hearts open to and committed to doing the work of for our whole lives. It's going to continue to change form. The way we know faith will change and grow. Sometimes there will be doubt. Sometimes there will be confusion. And even that doesn't mean you don't love God and aren't loved by God.
Yeah.
It's all part of what this conversation of having a human experience really is.
Yeah. And so I want to talk about sort of some of the practicalities too, if you're someone who's seeking to have a deeper relationship with faith and with spirit. And, you know, I assume when we're talking, at least for me, when I talk about God, it's the God of your understanding, whether that's Jesus, Allah, Mary, Yeshua, you know, whoever, right? Like universe. But there is this, for me, I had this real resistance for a long time to, I don't know, personifying God. And God is still not like a man in the cloud or a woman on a whatever, you know, or even Jesus, although I think Jesus is amazing and is a very dear friend and guide of mine. But I think what one of the things you talked about in the book, which I was like, yes, because I feel so strongly about this too, was this idea of how we outsource our worth. And, you know, one of the things that I am always, I mean, on a daily basis, a million times a day, whenever I'm talking to individuals or groups or counseling or whatever, obviously the issue of self-worth comes up and people talk about how to build self-worth. And I'm always saying, like, look, there's a difference between self-esteem and self-worth. Self-esteem is I love and accept myself because I'm a good person or I'm kind or I'm smart or I'm generous or whatever those things are. I'm good at sports, whatever you want to pick. But self-worth is this understanding that you are unequivocally and undeniably worthy of all the love in the world simply because you exist, you know, and that you, and there's this I call it, because it's something I've really only developed over the past 2 years inside myself, the ability to do this. But I talk about it all the time, this sense of being able to rest in the arms of God, which you were kind of describing, where I will literally, and I'm gonna ask you in a minute how, ways to do this, and I'm guessing you're gonna say meditation is one of the ways. We'll get to that in a second. But when I am meditating, or even if I'm just like waking up in the middle of the night with a pit in my stomach and thinking about ridiculous things that are stressing me out, I'll hand it over, right? Like,
Yeah.
God, just take this from me and let me rest in your arms. And I imagine myself just sinking. It's not a human arms, it's not literal arms for me, might be for someone else, but I sink into this velvet kind of where it just envelops me, and I let myself and soften into that and let myself be enveloped. And it is so much better and beyond whatever human. And as a recovering codependent, that was where I always sourced my emotional safety and worth, was outside myself for most of my life until I maybe hit my late 30s. So
Yeah.
I think it's so important and so fulfilling and so beautiful, but also, to me, I always say, you can't, if you start tapping in and tuning into that higher power and getting that guidance, it's hard not to recognize how lovable you are, because you just do, right? I mean, what would you say to that? And how do you
Yeah.
start building that relationship? What advice would you give just from the practical side?
Yeah. I so resonate with that practice that you have. I think I have one that feels so similar. Um, that idea of like, let me relax into God. Let me really kind of live the understanding that it's not an opinion, it's just true. We have control of nothing.
Mhm.
We control nothing. And I think when you're not relaxing into God, that creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of confusion. Being alive is hard, being alive is challenging. And when you don't have faith, or you don't have that worth that you've built up in yourself, you're constantly moved by the fact that you don't have control and all the things that are happening or could potentially happen to you. And I think when you kind of just rest in the fact that, and it's gonna happen anyway, right? Like,
Mhm.
everything is by design and nothing happens without God's permission. And I know that is hard to sit in depending on what you apply that knowing to. But I control none of this anyway. So I am only bringing myself suffering by being in delusion, thinking that I do. Why not? Why not relax in God? I think that's where I landed. And as soon as that piece clicked, it was just, that is now my default setting. That is now the absolute first thing I do without thinking. And my work more so is to stay present in the circumstance of being alive in as much integrity and stability and love as I possibly can. I something that I deeply recognize and I have a lot of respect for is that I recognize that I am here to bear witness. I recognize that to be alive and to be in the role of observer, which is where meditation helps bring you, it is to take in a lot of the sorrow and grief about being here. But it
Mhm.
also creates a lot of space to see like the profound beauty and the miraculous divine nature of being here as well. But it's both. And I don't kid myself to believe, even on a healing journey, and a lot of people think when you go on one, you're going to come out and it's no worries forever, right? It's like, no, the worries are always here. It's how you relate to them that changes. So it's like, even on a healing journey, even on, as someone that's been meditating for over a decade and always looks to seek the enlightenment in things or come to a more enlightened understanding, I also recognize the fact that, like, no one promised any of us that the human experience would not be challenging, And I think when we fight that by wanting things to be good all of the time, we're just pursuing happiness, just, being grateful to be alive when there's pleasure present, I think we really do ourselves a disservice. Like, the idea of bearing witness means that there is burden to that as well, right? I am holding something, I am bearing the weight of something, but we have to keep our eyes open. We have to keep pouring into ourselves, but we have to be here for all of what this is. And this is what it's always been since humanity began. So I think some of the really tangible ways someone can begin to be in pursuit of God is
Mhm.
to really start to switch the lens from looking and striving for happiness and really recognizing the moments that are simply enough. That is what really led me, I think, to the experience that I'm currently having with God, where I've never felt that my life was more beautiful. I never felt
Mhm.
that I was more worthy and lovable. I never felt like um, more full in the knowing that all my needs are met or they will be. You know,
Mhm.
I think that really came into not thinking anything was necessarily wrong or bad or deficient or broken when things weren't going my way. Really staying open to notice and be aware and just continue to be in participation with things. We have to let our lives change form on a daily basis. And I think when we do that, we begin to not just see God more and talk with God more, but we learn so much more from God. Our heart and our minds are actually open to receive the guidance that is most beneficial to our experience of being alive.
When you aren't fighting against what is happening or making it bad or wrong. Yeah, just getting curious. And I do think that comes in part, although I know many people have had a million horrible things happen to them and they haven't gotten here. But I know for myself too, when you've had enough, when you've been gobsmacked enough, you
Mm.
know, then you really do get the message like, we have no freaking idea what's going to happen 2 minutes from now, people. Zero.
Lit-
Everything can literally change in a split second from now for the most horrible, horrible, horrible worse, or the most amazing, miraculous good, and everything in between. But we are not in the driver's seat as much as we like to think we are.
Yeah.
And there is a peace in that. When you really get that, it can be scary as shit if you haven't ever thought about it before. But there is like you know, Jesus take the wheel kind of energy to it, which I think is really beautiful. And the other thing you said about switching the lens to just the good enough moments and even just being curious, which I'm going to ask you more about in a moment, about bad things happening and where that, how to hold that and how to be present with that without being sucked into blame or what am I doing wrong or why is this happening to me or all those stories we tell ourselves. But this idea of like the good enoughness and the finding the grace and the appreciation, not needing everything to be perfect and exactly as you want to be in that place of grace. You speak to this idea of the little joys is what it reminds me of. So to me, this is a perfect place to bring those in. So tell us about the little joys because I love that.
Yeah, the tiny joys.
Tiny joys. Sorry, I said it wrong.
Yeah,
Tiny
no, I mean, they're little, they're tiny.
joys.
They're the small little morsels for me that make life worth it, even
Mhm,
on the hardest days. I think sometimes each of us is called to become more with less, right? And I think that there is opportunity to see the blessing in that. When people are transforming, it's so important to strip yourself of all the things that you think you need or all the things that you kind of falsely believe make you you. So you can
mhm,
actually get into those crevices of who and what you are and build a more solid foundation that your worth can now rest upon. And so I found that for me, in a lot of the moments I was in, I had to realize that I didn't actually even know how to feel joy. I think that was something that was really surprising for me at first on the healing journey. As you're kind of dismantling yourself, you're recognizing that so much of what you thought was joy or happiness was actually like you in performance or
mhm,
you in performance with others. It's like I always kind of bring this forward for people who are dismantling in this way. How often does something great happen to you and you put up this big announcement on Instagram, or you throw the party, or you give this speech and everyone is like, yeah, and it doesn't feel that way inside.
Mhm.
I noticed that when I was really kind of early in my professional life, I was getting these huge wins and I couldn't feel them. And I was like, why am I such an ungrateful person? And I was judging myself, but it wasn't that I wasn't grateful. I didn't know how to have space to feel good or feel safe in goodness because I didn't have a lot of practice with it.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing about joy, feeling authentic, real joy, which is truly a sense of enoughness and an opening to, the love that is always present and around. It takes practice. You have to kind of get your reps in. You have
Mhm.
to build your tolerance to feel it in your body. And by doing it sometimes in the smaller ways that just bring you a personal, private smile, that's how you can really do that. So for me,
Yeah.
like the tiny joys are like, how do I keep my oven lit? How do I, even on a hard day, do something that sparks that little flame inside and keeps my fire burning for my life, that keeps my fire burning for myself? And sometimes it is a little flickering baby flame of a tea light candle.
Mhm.
Sometimes it is a rager. It is like a forest fire inside. It is like that crackling fire on a winter night. Um, but being kind of present with the fact that whether it is that tea light candle or that raging flame, that's enough.
Yeah.
Each season of what I'm able to have and give is enough. So seeking tiny joy specifically for me means like seeking beauty. I am a I am a Venus and Taurus for the astrologically minded. So
Yeah.
I'm all about sensory and pleasure and feeling and beauty and nature and sight and richness, like the richness of soil. So some of the ways I like to do that is every day I set up like a little scape. I have a garden. And so I'll get a flower or a leaf or something natural from outside. I'll put it in this little copper dish I have. Next to it, I'll light some incense. And then just for a few moments, I'll kind of watch the sun come through my window and move through the smoke, or with prisms I have hanging in my window,
Mhm.
watch the rainbow reflection hit different walls. And I mean, I really can't tell you how much that brings me to life, especially on a tough day. The work that I do, I'm always steeped in some of the sadder parts or the harder parts of the human experience. I often find myself having the privilege to sit at the bottom of the ocean with people. That is the nature
Mhm.
of the work that I do. And the way that I restore myself, the way that I keep vitality kind of vibrant in my heart is to fill my day with those teeny tiny pleasures, those teeny tiny moments of witnessing beauty, seeing the sun,
Mhm.
stopping to bear witness to it, literally picking up the leaf or the flower and pressing it to my face. That's how I stay in my human experience. That's how I stay in my gratitude.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I do the same thing. For me, dappled light gets me every time. And I think it's such an important thing. I was really careful, or at least I did my best to try to model that for my kids, stopping in the moment to appreciate these tiny moments of beauty around us, or the smells, or the textures, or the senses. I think it's something that, especially in today's world, that we aren't trained to do, but it also, I have also discovered, which I didn't really think about before, that the more you are willing to feel, the more you can feel, right? I would have agreed with that long ago. But what I didn't understand is that the more pain I was willing to let myself feel, the more my capacity would stretch for joy.
Yeah.
Now I had to be willing to feel joy, right? Which is a whole other conversation. But and you kind of started speaking to the way to kind of start moving into joy. I think the tiny joys is a beautiful place to start and to stay, but that I have found that I actually have a greater capacity to somatically feel joy as a result of somatically feeling the bottom of the ocean, as you were saying.
Oh, that is just like the absolutely realist thing that I think it's just such a breakthrough for those of us when we get there, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's like you fight for so long against some of those harder feelings or the feelings that aren't as accepted by society, like deep depressive sadness or real anger. Like we look at those things, but as not elegant or not, civil. But
Mhm.
in fact, it's like all of those emotions are just absolutely sacred. They are as sacred as every single other emotion. They're all necessary. They're all part of what this human experience is. And I mean, God, what you said I agree with so deeply. It's like when I really let myself kind of look at some of those deeper, darker themes of my life and just accept the fact that this is my life. Um, I I can access joy in my body in a deep breath in a split second. And I used to go months to years without knowing if I was feeling joy truly or
Yeah.
without it feeling restorative for me, without it aiding me in recovery. And now it's like really, like truly just taking something in like a child's smile and taking
Mhm.
a breath as I'm witnessing it. My body is filled filled to the brim with love and presence.
What a beautiful thing. Well, so you're let's step into the so much of your book, there we're talking about more of these ethereal concepts, but it's super practical. And you have steps and you have guides and mudras and meditations and all kinds of beautiful practices and a whole system that you kind of created out of your own pain that you were, with everything you had learned up until that point, and then co-creating it with your all your knowledge and the downloads you were getting and just intuiting it as you went, and you kind of created this system. One of the things, and you kind of alluded to this a minute ago, I think I don't remember exactly how you said it, but starting to excavate the crevices, right? The places where the pain lies. And that I love how you say to kind of start at the tippy top penthouse of your pain, like the tip of the iceberg. Because as we were saying, there are layers upon layers. And trauma, by the way, I always say loves an open door. So as you're going through something, a loss, a pain, a whatever, all those, as were saying that you were discovering, all those earlier compounded things are all coming up for air and being like, oh, is now the time? Let's all come together and come at once, right? So there's this idea of you're never starting from scratch. We're healing again and again, but also for many of us, if you've never done any healing work, or even if you have, this idea it's starting at the penthouse. I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it all always comes down to our original wound.
Mhm.
Period. It always does, right? Everything else was simply a symptom of the original thing that happened to you or the original need that wasn't met. And then we are just replaying that curriculum over and over and over again until we really bring it up for review. So, it's like instead of starting and just focusing on healing how you feel about a breakup, you got to actually first go to how you feel about your parenting, right? Like you have to go to the deeper layers. And then what you usually find is it creates a lot less work for you to do. Because once you get that root, it's like getting, the queen bee in the hive. Once you get the root work done, the rest of it kind of dissolves and disappears on its own. And the new experiences are allowed to pour in. So I think, speaking to the practices, what I found was, and I really wrote this book for people who were a lot like myself, high level intellectualizers, people that think their feelings before they feel them, that have the vocabulary to express what they're going through or have a certain amount of awareness to understand what's happened to them and this is why they behave this way. But I think the thing that's really important for people to know on the journey is that awareness is simply the first step. It is not the end. And a lot of people stop there. And you can
Amen.
really high on your own supply, right? Like you can get really into yourself and your awareness and your ability to spot patterns and call things out. Um, you know, but that is like literally the introductory step. After that, you are invited to more, and I think that that sometimes is the scary part for people. If you think, "Well, I've already healed that. Why am I crying about it again?" Or, "Why is this showing up in my life?" And it's like, you get to bring this up for review now because of all the work that you've already done. Now you get to experience it differently and clear that pattern in the other ways that it showed up. And I think that that's what life and doing the work allows you to do. You heal it with your family system if that's what the root is.
Yeah.
You heal it with the past relationships. Then you get to heal it in, well, how did this show up in the workplace? You may not have noticed that at the time because you were fighting these kind of bigger themes and bigger experiences. Then you get to notice, how does this show up in my one on one relationships?
Mhm.
How does this show up in the way I interact with strangers? And you're just always kind of invited to these new lenses of perception or these new kind of prisms that you can kind of dive into. And so I think when you get to that point, to be quite honest, the work gets kind of fun because you look at it and you know you have the tools for it. And you know kind of the deep alignment that comes into your life when you say yes to the work, And so I think one of the things that I love doing in this book was really sharing some of those practices. I'm deeply studied in a lot of different healing modalities. I'm a multidisciplinary healer, which simply means I've studied a lot of healing traditions, gained certain levels of proficiency, mastery, certification in different ways to do energetic healing, emotional healing. Um, and there's just so many wisdom traditions and so many incredible paths. And we don't have to really choose just one. Now,
Yeah.
sometimes it's really powerful to build discipline and mastery in a certain path of being that you feel called to. And I deeply respect that. And I also think it's so beautiful at this time in the human experience in this year to be able to look back across history and really pick and pull and say, okay, what can this do for my body? Like, what can this do for my spirit? And so when I was in some of those deeper throes, but even so much earlier in my journey, when I was studying Ayurveda, when I was studying meditation and metaphysics, I brought that back forward to the table, my
Mhm.
tried and true practices. Then I heavily leaned into Chinese medicine. I heavily leaned into energetic work. I deepened my meditation practice by really being present with what is called mudras or particular hand placements. And I think the one that most people recognize the most would probably be that, or even Anjali Mudra, which is simply
Yeah.
hands in prayer position, usually right in the center of your heart. So, according to ancient Vedic tradition, those hand placements open up energetic channels within your body, and your presence with even noticing how disarmed your hands can become. Like it could be a little rigid at first and then slowly kind of fall into a more relaxed position. That shows you how you're feeling inside. It creates this new network of wiring to really let you know what you're feeling and where you're feeling it. A lot of us exist in the world and don't exist in our bodies. And
Amen.
being alive, we're having two experiences at once. We're having our interior experience, we're having the internal experience inside of ourselves, the one that typically only we know about. And then we're having the external experience, which has so many factors layered on top of it, and usually really rests in the way that we're being perceived and received with other people. And so, in that dynamic, we're kind of jumping in and out of our bodies.
Mhm.
Do practices like this, you're building more foundation for staying in for this experience. And I found through my practices that mudras were a really powerful way to do that and do that with some urgency. A lot of the practices I bring into this book, and again, these are only samplings of literally textbooks and textbooks and textbooks and centuries and millennia of histories of healing that exist throughout various cultures that have been used over time. But I found that, the practices that I chose for this book help alleviate suffering a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
You into a space of at least being allowed to taste what a new feeling feels like so that you can then begin the lifelong relationship of finding the things that meet your unique needs.
Yeah, and going into whatever rabbit holes, right? Pursuing more. Like, okay, this really resonated with me when I tried it. So I'm gonna and you're absolutely right. You introduced all kinds of different modalities and technologies for going beyond to going into feeling the grief, not just being aware of it or feeling the pain, beginning to heal it, beginning to integrate it, beginning to recalibrate yourself, all the things that go in to the healing beyond the awareness piece or just talking about it, right? Because we can talk about it and read about it, but it's really about the practice. And I think, one thing you spoke to is this idea of repeating the curriculum. One of the things, I have this grief healing collective, which is this online membership platform where we do all kinds of healing activities together. And I give them tons of resources and I do retreats and I do these grieving mama meetups once a month. And so I've been with grievers intensively. I mean, I always worked with grievers in the past, but I would say over the past couple of years intensively. And in addition to it, what I was observing about grief being a pathway to awakening, what I also think is so beautiful about it is that, I'm thinking of this one woman in particular whose adult son died, and she was just filled with rage and pain, obviously. And she started having the, PTSD come up real hard from her earlier traumas. Makes sense, right? Because as we were talking about, tip of the iceberg, penthouse, right? And how everything starts coming up to be cleared. And what I think is so beautiful is that she's been doing now, she discovered EMDR. For her, that's been unbelievably healing. And as a result of wanting to heal from the loss of her son, she now is healing all this old childhood trauma and generational trauma. Um, and it's opening up new pathways for her that are so unbelievably beautiful. But for her, this idea of, like for me, my big core wound, there are a million wounds that Sammy's loss triggered, but it was like this feeling of abandonment and disconnect from God, really, is what it was. And early childhood abandonment, but also that disconnect. And I remember saying to my therapist healer, sort of my person that has been my ongoing teacher and mentor, I get the assignment because at this point, not only had my son died 2 years prior, but now my eldest had become suicidal and was serious about it. He's 27, so I was out of control. And I was trying to wrap my head around losing two of them. And I said to her, I get the assignment on a certain level. Like, I need to be so connected to my faith and my connection to God that I can just hold this possibility and know that as painful as it might be, I will survive it. And I get that, but why? I remember saying to her, why the fuck does it have to happen, this journey through my kids? And she said, Laura, because that's the only fucking way it would happen. That's the only way you would do it. And I was like, shit, you're right. That's what it would take for me personally. I'm not saying that's true for everyone, but that's what it was going to take. And to me, that's just such a beautiful hint or connection to, it's all divinely being orchestrated. And when you can kind of take a step back, I think it's so beautiful. There's so much more I want to talk to you about, including meditation. I have so many things, because you're the guru of so many things, including meditation, even though I don't believe in gurus, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
But you're an outlier, as Malcolm Gladwell would say. You're a master of this. The one question I want to ask you is with meditation, and especially if you are now stepping into this to heal, or maybe even you've always practiced like me, and then after something horrible happens, you alluded to this earlier, that with meditation, some bad, when your mind gets quiet, That's why a lot of people don't like to meditate, right? Is because all those feelings come bubbling to the surface. So, is there any guidance or advice you can offer? Because obviously, there's going to be a resistance to doing it. You start to meditate, you know it's going to help with the neuroplasticity of your brain and with your spiritual connection. It has all these benefits, but it's painful when you start to do it. So, what would you say to that?
Meditation, you are going through so many layers of awareness and enlightenment. And that is why it is a practice. It is something that you are meant to be in exploration with over time. I think when you first start meditation, and not to speak for everyone, but I think a large amount of first time meditators, meditation does exactly what it's supposed to do. It clears space, but in order to clear space, very often you have to look at, review, and release what is coming up. And so that is the beginning kind of invitation to do so. And so when you're beginning your practice, what you usually notice first is all the barriers you have up against doing said practice. You notice that you are annoyed by it very often. It might be making you angry. You might be frustrated in judgment of it. You might feel like it's a competition. I need to excel at doing this. I need to do it right, but it's really the beginning stages. You're building your capacity to simply sit with yourself, to simply be present with yourself without inviting in external stimuli. And I think, it's really interesting to look at why that is creating a reaction. We don't have a lot of practice in that as in society anymore. How often are people just sitting down and being, right? Like we're not. You are instantly the first free second, even in traffic, pulling out a phone because you must consume. And there's no judgment in that. We were all tricked into doing that. All of that happened to our brains without our permission. We didn't know any of this was going to become how we react to ourselves in life, 20 years ago when we started playing with the internet or smartphones or social media. So we are the bridge generation. This is something that we all suffer with and have to figure out. But when you're in the beginning of meditation, that's what you're going to face. Then once you're able to sit still and close your eyes, a lot may come up because this is the first time you're allowing yourself to be disarmed. It's the first time you're allowing yourself to kind of begin to temper into what it feels like to be in your interior space. And so if there is anything unprocessed, right? If there's anything that's been shoved deep down anywhere, all of that is kind of bubbling up with excitement because it can't wait to be free. It can't wait to be released. It can't wait to be noticed so that it can be tended to, And as long as we're approaching our meditation practice, and this is what happens over time, but this is what to be present with, you have to approach it without expectation or judgment. You're not going to come into enlightenment tomorrow unless you are maybe the Buddha reincarnate. It's like it's not going to happen on the first meditation. It may not even happen in the first year. But there is no more important work you could be doing with your life than slowly learning to be in mastery, in pursuit of mastery with what this practice is. So I think those first layers are the layers that unburden you. Those first layers are the ones that release. Then you're invited into kind of higher awareness. And this is where I think we're able to really connect to the divine nature of being alive. You are coming into a freedom of thought. You are coming into space, which allows, these downloads to come into your life, these instantaneous awarenesses, sometimes these healing of deep-seated subconscious patterns and thoughts can really now be cleared in the blink of an eye. And you may not have to learn things through pain anymore or through physical experience anymore. And I think even that, stretches your capacity to be with yourself, but now in a completely different way. And every time you're kind of up-leveling your IQ about who and what you are and why you're here and how you're intended to serve. all of this practice is deeply connected to so many things, the unburdening, but also the alignment of purpose, the alignment of really being in your life as the authentic nature of who you are. And so, after you get into that layer of now really being able to open and access your intuition, your downloads, your deeper knowing, your deeper connection with the divine, you're then invited into an even higher path than that. And it keeps going and it keeps going and it keeps up leveling. And I think, eventually you get to a place that I'm really enjoying in my life right now where meditation feels like absolutely pleasurable. Like I
Mhm.
am in meditation and I am moaning. I am like, just like, oh my God. It's like this pleasure smile is escaping on my face. And the second I close my eyes, I feel free,
Mhm.
and I find myself even when I'm not meditating, and I love my practice, I do it twice a day. But even when I'm not meditating now, if I'm just out, even with people, and there's nothing happening, I'm trying to close my eyes. I'm
Mhm. Go there. Yeah.
trying to feel, so meditation helps you get out of the ego of your feelings and then reconnect with the divine nature of what it is to feel.
Ah, beautiful. Boy, was that a good description. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you are, all you do in the world, all your wisdom and guidance. I'm so excited for this book baby to be out in the world. You guys, it is called Living in Wisdom, a guide to awakening your highest self and developing self mastery. Um, and where else we'll put this in the show notes and the link to get the book, but where else can people find you? Or because I know you have apps and you have a wellness community and you have all kinds of offerings.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I also did the audiobook for this, which I'm really excited about.
Mhm.
So check that out too, if you feel called. I lead meditation on what is called the Presence app. So on that app, you can find some really amazing fellow meditation teachers. I have many, many, many meditations on there, and often I'm leading daily meditation on
Oh,
such a host of different topics and wisdom traditions. And then you can also listen to my podcast, which is called Deeply Well. Of course, available everywhere you listen to podcasts. And I'm always exploring higher consciousness, self care, pain, holistic healing and health, and having some cool people on. And yeah, those are all the ways that you can consume me right now. You can visit my website, debbybrown.com. Um, and of course, IG and all the places, just my name.
beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laura. What an honor and a privilege to be here with you.
Oh, it's my privilege as well. All right, Debbie Brown. The first question is, what do you think the purpose of love is?
The purpose of love is the entire point of being alive. It is the entire point of incarnating as human on this planet. It is to feel it, it is to witness it, it is to grieve it, and it is to embody it in all
Mm.
that we do and say and share ourselves as.
Oh, that's one of my favorite answers of all time. That was a good one. What is one of your favorite ways to show yourself love?
One of my favorite ways to show myself love, I think, on just a regular basis is to hold my own heart. I really love the position and posture of just putting the
Mm.
base of a very flat palm right in the center of my chest. It helps me feel really present in my body and really present in my life experience, and really supported. I think another way that I feel really loved is spending time with myself, by myself. I really love to find little pockets of time where I can just be in creativity and be in free form. I usually open up all the windows in my house, light some incense, play one of my favorite like jazz playlists, and just kind of walk around and notice the tiny details of my life.
Mm. Beautiful. And what is one way that you want to be, or not even most, just one way that you want to be remembered when you're no longer here in this plane.
I want to be remembered as a helper. I really want to be remembered as like a helper of humanity, someone that was willing to witness all the things that were happening and still had the ability to show up in service and to show up in grace. I want to be remembered for strength and grace and compassion and helping and serving.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks for listening and crying out loud with me. If something you heard today helped or made you feel less alone, please follow, share, and review. And for more tools and a community that deeply understands you and your pain, visit the Grief Healing Collective at drlauraberman.com/grief healing. I'll see you next time on Crying Out Loud.
There's a hollow in my chest where your laughter used to be. Space at every table, an empty seat I see. The woman I was before you left didn't make it through, but love is still alive in me and still there between us two. They say just let it be alright, just keep your pain inside. But love this deep and pain this true were never meant to hide. So I'm crying out loud, I'm not holding it in, not shrinking my heart or the shape I am in. If grief is the echo of love that resounds, then I will love you crying out loud. Ooh. Some days grief's a tsunami, some days it's just a wave, some days I'm barely breathing, some days I feel so brave, but I am learning slowly what the breaking's about. The only way to freedom is feeling it out. Every tear that hits the ground is not a sign I'm weak. It's the sound of love still reaching, still learning how to speak. So I'm crying out loud, let the whole world see. Love didn't leave, it's alive in me, and the dark's a doorway if you let it be found. We don't heal by hiding, we heal crying out loud. What if the ache is holy? What if the wound's the door? What if the heart that's shattered can love even more? I'm softer in the tender places, fiercer where I stand. Grief didn't end my story, remade who I am. So I'm crying out loud with my hands unbound, not apologizing for the tears I